Welcome to the Tanya Acker Show. Diane Grossman's daughter, Mallory, took her own life at only 12 years old. And it was after enduring that unspeakable, unimaginable tragedy that Diane embarked upon a mission to save other young people and their families from a similar fate. Listen to what she did, learn who Mallory was, and let's all try to treat one another with a bit more kindness. I certainly will. Here I am with Diane Grossman. Diane Grossman, thank you so much for being here. And I am so sorry about the loss of your sweet little girl.
Thank you. Thank you so much for helping us share our story and helping us shed light as to what we like to refer to as the epidemic that is stealing our children's future. So thank you for opening up your platform to help us.
When did you first learn that Mallory was the victim of bullying in school? How did it come to your attention? When did you first become aware of it?
I think that's such a great question because you never get to that point. There was never a moment during the everyday that I ever really referred to what Mallory was going through as bullying. And I think that's part of the problem. There's this thing called relational bullying when the group of kids are friends with you on Tuesday, but they're not friends with you on Wednesday. You can sit and eat lunch with them on Thursday. So there was a lot of that going on. So I never really, until the day that we met with principal on the day that Mallory died, did I ever really use the word bullying. And I think when I look back at that, Diane, it had a lot to do with the stigma that is attached when you start to use the word bullying. I remember talking to the schools and always saying, I don't want to be that mom. And I think that was my way of saying to them, I'm not trying to elevate the situation. I don't want to attach the word bullying to it, but I need you to understand that this is more than just kids being kids.
That is so important, Diane, because when we think about both our own experiences as young people, and I don't have kids, but I see some of what goes on, and some of these young people are just mean. And now it seems that young people can't get away from it. So,
we've raised the bar, right? Yeah. We've raised the bar as a society, right? We have raised the bar of hate. We no longer talk like leave it to Beaver. We no longer say, go jump in the lake, right? Which means get out of my face or leave me alone. We don't talk like that anymore. We tell people to go kill themselves. If you tell someone to go jump in the lake, there's no death sentence attached to it. We as a society have raised the bar on our language, on our level of hate, and our kids are listening to us. They are listening to how hateful we are. There are influencers online that are paid for their comedic behavior that could be perceived as rude. And so I think it's a conjunction of all of that. And then, of course, you add social media and platforms to it, and then it just becomes a vegetable soup of a nightmare.
What were the things that you learned were happening to Mallory at school? You hear she's having these unfortunate experiences. You don't necessarily want to call it bullying because, as you said, right, you don't want to be stigmatized as that parent. Right. You didn't want Mallory stigmatized.
Which, by the way, I want every listener to understand, be that parent.
Be that parent.
Right? Like, that's the first message I'm going to say to them is stop trying to soften it by trying to have a negotiation. Call it what it is. Right? Your child is either harassed, intimidated, or bullied. They are excluded. They're being made fun of. Like, really and truly, I think the best thing that we could teach listeners is to understand is call it what it is. I tried to soften it so that hopefully I would get on the good side of the school system so that hopefully I could win their approval so that they would help me navigate what was going on. And at the end of the day, that just was in my opinion, the wrong decision. I really should have taken a much more proactive approach to it. And I should have taken the subtle things that were happening, I should have taken them more seriously. They would sit in class and pull Mallory's hair when the teacher wasn't looking. And I always say to teachers, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. They would call her names. They would make fun of her. They would make sure she didn't have a seat at lunch, right? It was kind of open seating, but it was assigned seating. So basically there were 2 or 3 tables that the kids could sit at, and they would kind of spread out to make sure that she didn't have a seat at lunch. Sensitivity is the number one characteristic for children who self-harm. And Mallory was extremely sensitive. So instead of, people used to say to me, well, why didn't Mallory fight back? A child like Mallory isn't going to fight back. You know, a child that's picked on, that is a victim, that's literally the characteristic that bullies look for, is they look for the weakest link that wants to be friends with them. That's literally the definition of relational bullying. So it was those little subtle things that would happen every day. Mallory was a gymnast, and so it was always odd to me that her lunchbox always came home full. I never really put 2 and 2 together that she wasn't eating lunch until I started asking questions. And then, of course, the guidance counselor said, well, she can come eat lunch with me. And I remember thinking, what 12-year-old wants to eat lunch with a 40-year-old guidance counselor? Like, you want to eat lunch with your peers and hang out, and they don't have recess. So lunchtime is the only social interaction they really have. So it was very subtle things. And I think that's why we chose to speak out so openly about Mallory's situation, her life, her death, and what she experienced at school. Because it's not the big kid pushing the little kid, you know, or stealing their lunch money. These are very subtle and cruel ways. And I always say it's like little tiny paper cuts on her heart every single day.
Well, and I think that you make such an important point in identifying the character of the child who is often targeted by the bully, because as you just said it, Diane, like bullies, they pick their victims. They pick
100%.
the people who are going to be the most hurt. They pick the ones who won't fight back. They pick people with sensitivities because they know that that person is just trying to get approval, trying to be liked, trying to be included. So let's just set a little more of the stage. Mallory is 12. She's coming home. She's getting these horrific messages on social media. Those
happened much later.
Happened.
And I think that's it. Yes. And I think, again, that's the important part of this is that there wasn't this big explosion of something. And I think parents need to know that children will hide what's going on because they want to fix it themselves. No one likes to admit that they're not popular and that they're hated at school, particularly children that are going through puberty, that are having, brain development. There's so many little things that go on in there. So they want to fix it for themselves. I remember Mallory used to say to me, Mom, don't say anything because you're going to make it worse, right? Like their thought is, well, we'll fix it. Like if I can, and that's why I say it's so important to identify children that do act out this way. I always say hurt people hurt. One of the things is that they look for this, and that's how they identified Mallory, is that, they would get her to do certain things and they would be friendly with her on one day and then they would treat her badly on the next. So not only is it confusing for the victims, but it's confusing for the parent and even confusing for the school system, right? Like one day they're walking past the hall and they saw Mallory was talking to the girls. And then the next day they get an email from me saying that something happened. So it's very, very subtle when the text messages. Mallory had a cell phone, but she wasn't allowed to have social media. So that was kind of like the one thing that I did stand firm on. So it was the text messages, and those came after the winter. They came early spring and then into the summer before she ended her life.
So let's talk about early on, when you first become aware of, she's having these issues are happening at school. And you described it really well. It's kind of like death by 1,000 cuts. It's first
right.
Like they just prick you and come for you in little ways. When you first hear that she's having these uncomfortable experiences at school, what do you do? What do you say to school officials?
Well, in hindsight, I did what every parent does. I say to the kids, ignore her. That Mallory, don't be friends with those girls. I remember early in September, I said to Mallory, well, Mallory, if you want to be friends with them, why don't we have them over? Maybe if they saw you and they saw that you want to be friends with them, because we were relatively new to the district. We'd only been here this was 6th grade, so we'd been here since 4th grade. And I had seen that the girls were a little more advanced They were a little more, not outgoing, but they were definitely had a lot more freedoms in their lives than Mallory had. And I say that one of the girls was already in 6th grade sexually active. So yes, I know. But so for me, I said, well, maybe if you invite them into your life, right? Like maybe they would see that. So I remember having the girls over and they locked Mallory out of her bedroom. Mallory came downstairs and the girls were upstairs. And I was like, Mallory, what's going on? And she's like, oh, they needed private time. And I was like, private time? That's not, no. So I remember going up and the door was locked. And I said to the girls, if you're going to, be here, you can't lock Mallory out of her own room. And I remember saying to her, ignore those girls. You don't want to be friends with them. They're not they're not good girls. And I didn't mean that from a negative. I meant that more from it's not going anywhere. You're not going to be able to be friends with these girls. It was very clear early on from an adult that they were not going to be friends with her.
How did you become aware of the situation escalating?
I would say it was around after Christmas when we got back from Christmas break. Mallory had gotten a UGA sweatshirt and she had gotten some Sperry's and they were monogrammed by her aunt and uncle. And she was so proud of them at Christmas. And she wore them to school the very first day afterwards. And then she came home and she goes, I can't wear these. And I was like, why can't you wear them? I started to see that her behavior started to change based on how they were treated her at school. So, of course, and then in February, when the marking period came out, her grades plummeted. And when I say plummeted, she went from an A student to literally, she had a 60 in science.
Wow.
And that's when I was like, oh, I need a meeting with the school. So I immediately emailed the teachers, assuming that they knew what was going on because I had already been in touch with the guidance counselor and the vice principal. So I went into the meeting in March with her teachers thinking that we were all on the same page. And when I got to the meeting, they had no idea what I was talking about. They were surprised by that, and they turned the meeting into Mallory had a comprehension issue. So then as a parent, I second-guessed myself again. And I said, oh, well, maybe she's really struggling in school. Maybe this has nothing to do with the behavior. Because as a mom, no one wants to admit that your kid is being bullied because of who they are, right? And there was nothing about Mallory that stood out. She was just a normal everyday kid. It just seemed odd to me that she would be picked on. And so it was strange to me. So even in March, I said, gosh, maybe she has a comprehension. So I got her a tutor. So the entire time, it never really felt like it elevated to me until the night before she died. She called me just really soft and sad. And she said, Mom, what time are you coming home? And I said, regular time, Mal. Why? What's up? And she said, I had a really bad day. And I had heard that before, but in that moment, I heard like desperation in her voice. And I said, I'll be home regular time, Mal. I'll be home. And so I said to her dad, I was like, something's up, like something's going on. We went home and we tried to have a regular evening. We threw some hamburgers on the grill, like it tried to be. And she asked to eat dinner in her bedroom. And I let her, but we always sat together and she enjoyed family dinner. So it was odd, but I let her because I could see that there was something. And then about maybe an hour or so went by and I said to Seth, I go check on her, see something's up. And he went upstairs and it wasn't 15, 20 minutes. I just heard her. I heard her sobbing. She just cried like she'd never cried before. And she cried so loud that her sister Carly came out of the room. Like it was that sound of just tears. And she was holding that cell phone. And that's when she showed me the pictures that they had taken at school during school hours where they were making fun of her. And she just broke down in that moment. She just sat on the couch and she sobbed. And she was broken. They won. They broke her in that moment. And so immediately I tried to screenshot the images and text them to myself. But of course I made a mistake. I'm that, 50-year-old, don't know how to use technology woman. And so I actually screenshotted the images to the girl that had sent them to her. And she immediately responded back with a laughing emoji face. And I said, this is Mallory's mom. Have your mom call me right now. It was just a joke. And she immediately didn't want to respond. And I was like, this is Mallory's mom. You're in a lot of trouble. Call me. Have your mom call me right now. Because again, I thought, let's just get to the bottom of this. Mallory's clearly distressed, something. Within about 5 minutes, the mother called me. And it was crystal clear that wasn't going anywhere. She said, you must be new to Copeland because the boys are a lot worse. Can't your daughter take a joke? My daughter would never call your daughter fat because she's the fat one. And I was like, well, hell, apple meet tree. And so I knew that conversation was going nowhere. I emailed the school. And the next day we had a 3-hour meeting. And the principal and guidance counselor, they just dismissed everything. As a matter of fact, he gave Mallory a poker chip and had her write her initials and date 6/14/17 on it, and said it was okay to be hated online and that she had to be all in order for life to be. And a few hours later, my husband found her.
Diane, it is very hard to hear this about a 12-year-old girl who is being tortured and tormented to such an extent that she doesn't feel the world holds a place for her. I am only asking you this because I think it's important that people know the sorts of things that young people are saying to one another and attacking one another with, and how they're really, how these things become so hurtful. What did you see? What kind of messages was this young person sending to Mallory?
Obviously, they told her to kill herself, right? They told her to kill herself. That's probably the most vile. They took her picture and edited it and said, poor Mal was one of the pictures. And then there was another one that says, you have no friends. And it was a picture of her sitting alone waiting for the bus. It was Mallory. I remember in one of the text messages, Mallory wrote back to her because Mallory wasn't on Snapchat, so she couldn't see what they were writing about her. Write it on Snapchat and then screenshot it and text it to her so she could see. That's the level of cruelty. It's bad enough to bully someone online, but everyone's like, well, why didn't Mallory ignore it? She literally couldn't ignore it, and she wasn't on Snapchat. I wouldn't let her have that platform. So they would screenshot the images and text them to her of what they were saying. So it's that level of just cruel and mean.
I read that there was one incident where you reached out to the school and they had a meeting with Mallory and one of her young tormentors. And what they did was they forced the girls to hug. I guess they told them to hug it out. As if that was going to solve it.
Yeah, all of Mallory's bullies. There was one point where there was an email exchange, and I want to say it was probably in October-ish timeframe, October, November, where there was an incident, and I emailed the school and said, Mrs. Patel, just so you know, this is what's going on. And yeah, they did. They brought Mallory in to the guidance room and had Mallory hug it out. And then afterwards, Mallory was crying, right? And so afterwards, the guidance counselor let her leave to go to the bathroom to wash her face. The bullies followed her and said, if you ever do that again and tell, we'll kick your ass. And she came home and told me, and she said, because you told Mrs. Patel what I told you, I got in more trouble. So again, she's developing the personality that she can't trust her mother. She can't trust the school because when she would give me the information of what was happening at school, of course, I would report it to the school because you feel like as a mom, that's what you're supposed to do, right? We're all on the same team. I need parents to understand that the public school system is broken and we're not on the same team. We're not. We're not even on the same field. Forget about being on the same team. And so, they made Mallory hug it out. And the funny thing is during all of the depositions, that was part of the testimony, and they denied it. And then when the girls were deposed during our case, not only did all of the girls have the exact same story, they said, oh, yeah, even the bully said, oh, yeah, we had to hug it out. So they lied under oath. And the bullies backed up what Mallory was saying. It was fascinating to me.
What's also fascinating in a dark and troubling way, is the reaction of the parent of one of these young people when you approached her with the messages. I think you said it best, apples and trees. Right? Like these kids show up engaging in these behaviors. Something's going on at home or not, which is normalizing and enabling this conduct. So 2017, your sweet little girl takes her own life.
Yeah.
She's a baby. She was 12. 2018, you bring a lawsuit against the school district. What's the basis of your lawsuit?
And then there's several angles you could go there. I mean, first of all, they violated Mallory's civil rights, right? Because she's entitled to a safe learning environment. That's number one. But ultimately, they were held responsible because the principal humiliated Mallory on the day that she died. He humiliated her. And the basis of our lawsuit was not only did they violate their own, New Jersey has very firm New Jersey statute it's called in New Jersey HIB, Harassment, Intimidation, and Bullying Act. And they violated the rules of that. And then they also violated their own policies and procedures. So that's the basis of our lawsuit, was really going after that they didn't even follow their own policy. That there was documentation. They denied to file a HIB there was an email that went through where I demanded that a HIB investigation go into place, and they called me and said, we're not going to do it. There was an email thread between the principal and the guidance counselor that's like an inter-office thread where Mrs. Patel forwarded my complaint to the school, and the principal just ignored it. He refused to acknowledge it. And that was like January.
According to what I read, the school actually advised you not to file a formal complaint. They told you not to file a formal complaint.
They told us that it would be denied because it's up to the principal to determine whether there's two buckets you can put this type of behavior in. One is code of conduct and one is an actual act of bullying. I think, again, as parents, we need to understand, I don't care what bucket you put it in. I'm not looking for kids to have a HIB against them, which, by the way, means nothing. It's a citation. It's a warning. So we need to stop exaggerating the punishment. They make it sound like it's a permanent folder thing. There's no such thing. But I don't care what bucket you put it in. Just let the behavior end. Like, it needs to stop. So yes, they advised me that they would not open up a HIB investigation or file a HIB against the girls because in their minds, it did not fall under the category of HIB, which means that they didn't even reach page 4 of HIB, which said any other distinguishing characteristics. A lot of times, many of the schools make mistakes and say that HIB only pertains to protected categories. And that's, again, it's lack of training, lack of education. They don't even know their own policies and procedures.
When you say protected categories, you mean there's a misimpression that you've got to be a student of color or LGBT or one of these things, when in fact, they're supposed to protect all kids, regardless of the package, who are being subject to this bullying behavior.
Right, and the language defines it. In the New Jersey statute, it says race, color, and so forth. Then it says, and any other distinguishing characteristics. So it spells out the language very clear that every kid is protected under New Jersey HIB, and you can wear glasses and not be made fun of for wearing those glasses, and it still can follow a HIB. A lot of schools make the mistake of saying, well, because they didn't make fun of your glasses or because they didn't make fun of your skin color or your sexual orientation, then it doesn't follow under HIB, and that's just not true. That's lack of training in our school systems, which is why I say they're so fractured.
And it also seems, Diane, that the onus for getting the protection against the bully is put on the victim. You know, you've got somebody giving her a poker chip saying, suck it up.
Right. I say that all the time. We always ask the rape victim what she was wearing and how much she had to drink. Like, we should be teaching our boys that a rape victim is not an opportunity for sex. She's an opportunity for an accusation. Why should Mallory have to say anything? She should be able to go to school and have a seat at lunch and she should be able to get an education. I mean, she was in math class with two of her bullies and forced to be in the group project with her bullies. Why would the teacher do that?
In July, you reached a $9.1 million settlement with the district. You don't even have to say this. I am not a parent. There is no dollar amount that can compensate you for what you've lost. Having said that, I'm often on this platform talking about situations when people shouldn't sue. Sometimes you got to find a way outside of the courtroom. Court's not efficient. But sometimes when they're not listening, it may be your only recourse. I mean, am I right, Diane? It seems
100%.
that you were just up against a brick wall.
Here's the thing. I think that, there's two forms of justice in this country, right? There's criminal justice and there's civil justice. And in this situation, the only justice was civil liability. It's not about a dollar value. It's about the accountability of them. And if you don't hold organizations and institutions like our public school systems accountable for what they do, then we're never going to get any better, right? Like, we're just not. And so it was really the basis of acknowledging that you failed Mallory miserably. You did not follow your own policies and procedures. You were responsible. Mallory died on the day that we were in your office for 3 hours. First of all, it should have never been a 3-hour meeting. You don't tell a child that it's okay to be hated online because you're hated on Facebook. You don't do that, right? Like, again, I don't care what bucket you put it in. I just wanted the behavior to stop. I wanted the girls to leave her alone, and I knew that it was going to escalate. Everyone's like, oh, well, it was almost the end of the year and it would be over. It was never going to be over for her, right? Every time they did something, Mallory reported it, it was going to escalate, right? She had 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, all of high school. You talk to people that are truly bullied by someone in school, and it doesn't happen just 1 year or a couple of months. It is an ongoing repetitive behavior constantly. And the only way that today's schools are going to get that wake-up call to understand that the behavior is not okay, particularly when they allow technology into their schools, when they allow the kids to have the cell phones at school, when they allow them to text their parents. When you open up technology and bring it in, then you're holding yourself liable. And the only way to do that was to have the largest settlement in the country. And that's what we set out to do.
What's the difference, Diane, between the maybe mean kid who steps out of line from time to time and the bully who one has to take seriously? Or is there no difference? Are we making a mistake by dismissing too casually behavior by young people that were like, you know what, you got to do better, be better? I mean, are we too cavalier about some of these behaviors?
Yes and no. Listen, kids are going to be kids, right? And at the end of the day, Mallory was 12. She made a horrible mistake, and I will live with my portion of the mistakes that we made as a family for the rest of my life. So I'm definitely, I take accountability for our role in that. Here's how I describe it in my school presentations to parents. It's okay if your kid only wants to invite 10 kids to the birthday party. It's not okay for those 10 kids to show up with their cell phone and call the 11th and 12th and 13th and 14th friend and remind them that they're not included and to tag them online. Oh, I'm so sorry that you weren't here. Like, I think we have to understand that, yes, it's okay for little Susie not to like someone. It's not okay for little Susie to go online and to go out of her way to show the other child that she doesn't like them. I also think parents, how they respond is a huge part of it. When Mallory was in 3rd grade, she made fun of a little kid and his pants. And she walked past him and she's like, ha, 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 nice pants. I got a phone call from the principal where he said, Miss Grossman, we're going to have to open up a HIB investigation because, she made fun of him. He didn't speak great English and so forth. So I was like, okay, do what you have to do. When Mallory got home from school that day, I said, did you get did this happen? And she kind of was like, oh my God, Mom, you got to be kidding me. And I said, oh no, I'm not kidding you. She sat down at the table and she wrote 3 letters of apology. 1 to the child that she made fun of. The second one to the family, because when you bully someone, you bully that child and the whole family. And she wrote an apology letter to the principal, because out of all the things that the principal has to do, the last thing he needs to do is worry about Mallory Grossman making fun of some kid's pants. So how we handle, I always say it's okay if your kid is accused of being the bully or saying something, but how you handle it, how you parent it is ultimately what we should be proud of or what we should be paying attention to. Because if they can learn in third grade that it's not okay to make fun of someone's pants, then they also learn at 19 when they're an adult, where we have hazing at college, that there are issues, right? Let them learn accountability at a young age. We're waiting far too late in our lives for, as parents, to step up and actually be parents. We're too busy being their friends. And so it's a vegetable soup of mistakes that we're making as a society. Do I think that kids are overly sensitive? Sometimes, right? But that's a personality flaw. That still doesn't give someone the ability to call someone out and say something about them. So kids will always be kids. Kids are going to always make stupid mistakes. They're going to do things. They're going to say things that they shouldn't. But at the end of the day, as parents, we have to be prepared to parent that behavior so that children can learn from it. And as school systems, we need to be okay to piss off 10% of the population so that 100% of us will be happy.
Those 3 letters that Mallory wrote, that's you, Diane. That was your parenting that gave her the ethics and the morality and the wherewithal to do that. You took this moment, which I imagine for a parent has got to be one of the greatest tragedies in life.
It is the greatest. Like you can overcome everything in life. But the death of a child, it's completely unnatural. We're
totally
not supposed
unnatural.
to outlive our children. Yes.
You're not supposed to outlive your children. Absolutely unnatural. So after having endured that horrific tragedy, you secured this settlement. But even more importantly, Diane, you actually changed the law. Talk to us a little bit about Mallory's Law and how that will provide more protection for young people, protection that Mallory didn't get. And I have to say, I cannot stop thinking about, I remember what it was to be a 12-year-old girl. Sometimes I was on the receiving end of not so nice stuff.
Same.
Sometimes I said the not so nice stuff. But absolutely. I promise you, my parents at home were there holding me responsible for all of it. So the tragedy that we have lost, a 12-year-old young life because of this, is something that it's really hard to digest. What is incredible is what you've done to try to make the world safer for other young kids. Talk to us about Mallory's Law.
So I always tell everybody that Mallory's Law is a base hit, right? No World Series was ever won without a base hit. And so Mallory's Law is exactly that. So it took the New Jersey HIB, which, by the way, is one of the strongest language statutes written. So if your state doesn't have it, I would say to your listeners, every state needs an anti-bullying statute so that schools have a guidelines. I think where New Jersey falls is they do a great job of defining bullying, but they don't do a really great job of training on it or giving you what to do next. What are the steps once you identify the bullying? So what Mallory's Law does is it puts a procedure into place. One of the things that we noticed when I'm no lawyer, but I knew to put things in writing when I was communicating with the school. So from the very beginning, I always drafted an email and I CC'd multiple people in it so that no one could come back and say, I never got your email. There was a paper trail there. So Mallory's Law forces the school system to put in a system that creates a paper trail. In New Jersey, that timestamp